What you're talking about is the New York Times.
To your question, Kristen Welker and others yesterday asked about, why are they moving the goalposts? Why aren't they calling it a recession?
So the New York, to what Jackie said, the New York Times wrote, U.S. economy shows another decline, fanning recession fears. CNN, U.S. economy contracts again, fueling recession fears.
Recession fears.
We're in a recession. Just say how confident you are to come out of it, some things that are positive. But when you tell people what their experience is not real, they don't believe what you say next. That's the issue, and that is the cover of the New York Post today.
It is the literal definition of recession.
That's right. Recession, pronounced, it's a noun. Plural noun is recessions. And it says a period of temporary economic decline during which trade and industrial activity are reduced. Sounds about right. Generally defined by a fall in GDP in two successive quarters. Sounds about right. The country is in the depths of a recession, is how you would use it.
Did that happen? Quarter one, we dropped 1.6%. Quarter two,
Yep.
0.9%, almost 1%. The literal definition of recession is that if you have two back-to-backs with a dropping GOP, you're in a recession, which literally we are in a recession if you go by the definition, but they're trying to change that.
Right, and Joe Biden said a couple of times yesterday, he said this is a different time because you look at, two GDP numbers down, but we've got such good employment numbers. He said the unemployment rate was 3.5%. But what he does,
we came out of COVID, people are hiring again.
Well, but here's what he does not count: the labor participation rate. Millions of Americans stopped looking, and they don't count in that number. And
Charles Payne said that's the number to look at.
Exactly, and that is why it is so hard for people to find people to work, because people have dropped out of the labor market for whatever reason. They're not there. That's why the number is low, and that is the hook that the president is hanging his hat on. It's not a recession because of the low unemployment. I just explained why we have low unemployment. People have stopped looking.
And how do you feel? Do you feel like you're in a recession? I mean, I guarantee the majority of Americans, if they've gotten a pay raise this year, it's not above the amount of inflation. Inflation's 9.1%. So you're actually losing money. You're paying an extra tax on everything that you buy because we are in an inflation.
And we can't gloss over what happened yesterday. Over the last 48 hours, we passed $800 billion in spending with this CHIPS bill and with the Joe Manchin, Chuck Schumer sneak attack, which is basically focused on climate change. Let me ask you, if you're dealing with inflation, if you're having trouble making ends meet, if you're one of the 60 to 70% living paycheck to paycheck that suddenly finds yourself in deficit, do you care about the solar panels? Are now going to be tax incentives on solar panels? So they're going to be turbines for windmills. China is laughing at us. This is somebody saying, your house may be on fire, but your hair looks good. Don't emphasize that. We have a huge problem, and I'm pretty sure in every poll I see, the most I see in terms of priorities for the average American, climate change is around 2%. Everybody's talking about inflation. And according to the New York Times and most economists, the Treasury Department hasn't even looked at all this spending and see how it affects inflation. The number one concern of yours. And they say that it'll have little, and then we had Jason Furman say it'll have little effect, maybe get inflation down a little. How could you, as President of the United States, not acknowledge recession and not go after inflation and sit there with a straight face and say, I'm addressing climate change, and then storm out there with your senior shuffle?
Think about the people that this affects the most, people on a fixed income, the older people. And they're in the second half of their life, if not later than that. They're not so worried about what's going to happen to our world in 20, 40, 50, 60 years or 100 years. They're more worried about retirement. They're fixed income. They can't afford to put gas in their car or buy that extra meat at the grocery store. They have to go do all their groceries one day per week. We've heard that time and time again from people at the diners because they can't afford the gas to keep going back out every single day.
Well, the Democrats call it the Inflation Reduction Act.
That's a joke. They're spending
P.T.
money.
Barnum named
it's
that.
Extra tax on everything.
Well, here's the thing. Joe Biden said it's going to reduce inflation because my advisors told me that. Of course, these are the same advisors that got us to the point we're at. It really should be called not the Inflation Reduction Act, but the Midterm Loss Reduction Act, because clearly the Democrats are loving this. Because, Ainsley, to your point about older Americans, They like the idea of lower prices on prescription drugs.
Correct, yeah.
A lot of people like the idea of deficit reduction.
If it turns out that.
We all like that,
So the Democrats look at this as a win before the November elections, and for them, this is a good thing. We're now talking about that rather than inflation. We're talking about, oh, look, what Joe Biden and those Democrats did. My insulin costs less.
Right.
So let's see. But a big win in Washington. Joe Biden suddenly, after a bad 6 months, is having a really good end of the week.
Yeah.
Subscribe to the Fox News YouTube channel to catch our nightly opens. Stories that are changing the world and changing your life. From Tucker Carlson tonight.